Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about why I publish under Erin J. Doyle. Not because that's a pseudonym, but because I kind of took a slightly roundabout and convoluted route to get to that, and maybe my tale will be of some help for people who are trying to decide if they publish under a pseudonym or their legal name. So, where does my story begin? Once upon a time, I submitted a piece of poetry to a journal for the first time ever, hadn't put any thought into what name to publish under, so I just signed the email Erin Doyle and sent it off into the world, expecting to start accumulating my rejections, and it got published immediately under the name that I had signed the submission with, obviously. And I just stuck with that for my first few published poems because that was fine. I mean, that was my name. All good. But then I did have a couple of problems with Erin Doyle as a name to publish under. The first issue that I had with the name Erin Doyle as sort of a brand, if you will, is that Doyle is an insanely common name. There are so many Doyles already out there in the contemporary author pool being highly successful. So even if you ignore like the ridiculous fame of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I have many contemporary competitors, if you will, with the same name. So the only way a potential reader could find me specifically is if they had my first name correct. And that's where I run into a little bit of a problem, because some people, and by some I mean quite a lot, but some people really cannot pronounce my name. And because they mispronounce it, if they were saying to someone, oh, this author Erin Doyle, they might actually not say Erin. The other issue, regardless of how a person's accent means they pronounce Erin, is that for some reason people mishear it. So regardless of how you pronounce it, a person may hear you say Erin, Aaron, Karen, Eric, Kieran, or Sarah. I don't know why Sarah, but it's really common. So a person could potentially tell someone about my work, say, hey, you should look up this author Erin Doyle, and then their friend completely misinterprets the first name, whether that's because of how the original person pronounced it or not, and could end up, wandering off looking for Sarah Doyle or Eric Doyle, whatever, and they're just not going to find me because there are already so many Doyles. So it struck me as a difficult combination to be working with, this apparently very difficult first name and a very common last name. The second issue that I thought there might exist with my name is that it's very gendered, and publishing can be very sexist, like the world. I had several experiences where I told someone in a face-to-face conversation that I was working on a vampire story, and I would get no further than that before they interrupted with a very condescending, judgmental tone, saying things like, oh, let me guess, the main character is like a young, plain Jane, handsome stranger comes to town and falls in love with her, and it turns out she's actually beautiful, and oh no, he's a vampire. And I just realised that I wasn't being given the benefit of the doubt for being able to write anything original. Then I went into a bookstore and I was looking at where vampire literature was placed on the shelf, and there were definitely two very distinct sections. Up at eye level were books which were, well, attempting to be sci-fi. Frankly, as a scientist, I was never convinced even slightly by their explanations, but attempting to be sci-fi, apocalypse type stories featuring vampires. And down here, like where you had to kind of bend down to look at them, were paranormal romance. These books were also very distinctly separated by male and female authors, which obviously just reflects the interests of the writers. But it struck me that maybe if I was a dude and I said, I'm writing a book about vampires, I wouldn't get those really negative knee-jerk responses from people assuming I was writing really, really bad Twilight fanfiction. That may or may not have been correct, but it struck me as a distinct possibility. This experience, coupled with the basic knowledge that, as a rule, female writers are less likely to get decent cover art, less likely to win awards, less likely to get high royalties, less likely to get high sales. We've got all of these kind of marketing, publishing industry things working against us, coupled with this assumption that if you're a woman writing about vampires, it must be trashy romance. And I thought, well, none of that's fair, and I don't want any of it. So maybe I could avoid it if I didn't write under my extremely obviously female name. And so I decided to switch from being Erin Doyle on the page to being EJ Doyle. I figured this was still my name. It wasn't a pseudonym, but it obscured my gender. I honestly was completely convinced that I was okay with this. But the moment a piece of my work came out and I saw, actually I can show you, it was this one. So I submitted my first piece of work as EJ Doyle, and there's this contents page, hopefully we can get it in focus. Can we get it in focus? Where it's full name, full name, full name, initials, full name, full name, full name. And I just had this moment when I saw that. It just wasn't as exciting and special to me to see EJ Doyle on a contents page as it had been to see Erin Doyle on a contents page. As EJ Doyle, I built a Facebook page and later a website and started trying to build up a platform, an internet presence as EJ Doyle. And I did what I assume everyone does when they start anything like that, which is ask your friends and family to go and like your Facebook page, which a large section of my friends and family did. Great! Now, I'm going to preface this with my family and friends are not stupid. I'm not angry at them. It's just a thing that happened. And I wonder if it happened because EJ Doyle wasn't distinctly different enough. Like maybe if I had used a full-on pseudonym this wouldn't have happened. But what I got was, in my comment sections, every couple of months, somebody would call me Erin. I was like, I'm trying to not be Erin, I'm trying to possibly be a dude, like, just stop it. And so, a couple of times a day, I just got into this habit of like checking that Facebook page and making sure there were no comments that I had to quickly delete. And the thing is that I had to delete probably half of the comments on any given post, partly because not many people commented, but it really sucked. Like, I regularly reminded people, both through sending private messages to the regular offenders and through just a general Facebook message on my private Facebook page, like, hey friends and family, thanks for liking and blah blah blah, but can you just remember not to use my name Erin, and this is why. And then a few weeks later someone would do it again and I'd have to delete their comment. Another problem that I had with being EJ Doyle was that I'm the type of author who leaves the house. I go out and do things, so other authors take photos of me and post them online and tag me. So either they would tag me as Erin Doyle because that's the name they know me as and it would have no marketing benefit at all, or they would tag me as EJ Doyle, at which point EJ Doyle was presented to the world as very obviously female. I was like, oh, this isn't working. I also had an experience where I went to the launch of a journal that I was published in, and another author who actually was my creative writing teacher at university years before happened to be there as well, and she did like the thing that you hope a more successful author than you will do. Took me around and introduced me to a critic, to her publisher. Like, this was an amazing thing. And of course every time she was like, oh, this is Erin. And then I had the awkwardness of, yes, but I'm actually publishing under EJ these days. And it was not the easiest thing to kind of slip in there. And then the worst thing possible, she introduced me to a literary critic who, obviously, crowded room, didn't quite hear when I was introduced and had to ask me to repeat my name. And I said, oh, it's Erin Doyle. And she went, oh yes, I know. And I was like, what? You recognise the name Erin Doyle? What? Because I'd only had a few things published under that name. I had thought that changing to EJ Doyle so early in my career wouldn't matter, but here I was, having just changed to using my initials instead, apparently too late. So what I ended up with was a whole bunch of Facebook followers who knew exactly what my name was and kept using it, thus telling the ones who didn't know exactly what it was and the fact that I was a woman. I ended up with a whole bunch of photos of me out in the world with EJ Doyle as a tag, even though I was trying to hide the fact that I was a woman. And then I had a critic who knew me as the name I was no longer publishing under. And then I had all these really awkward social interactions where I had to try and correct the name that people would recognise me by. It was just really awkward. Now I think a lot of this wouldn't have happened if I had gone with a just straight pseudonym. I think it would have been easier for friends and family to remember not to call me Erin if the rest of the name had been completely different. I think introducing yourself to someone as a name other than your given name is probably easier when it's still a name as opposed to initials, because you don't generally introduce yourself by your initials. That's kind of weird. So eventually I realised that everything that I had tried to do by switching to publishing under my initials was completely destroyed. Like it wasn't working. There was no point to it anymore. So I eventually decided, between that and the fact that EJ Doyle just wasn't as exciting to me as Erin Doyle was in print, that I was going to put EJ Doyle aside. I decided, rather than going back to Erin Doyle, to just put the initial in. Yes, it creates a third, like yet another name that I'm published under, but it does combine elements of the two that I was previously using. So if you know the work of one, you can kind of see how it links into the one that I'm now using. I kind of like Erin J from a marketing perspective because I think the middle initial, in addition to just being J, which just rolls off the tongue so well as a middle initial, I think it provides just that little bit of point of difference to help people find me if they're, told what my name is and maybe they get the Erin part wrong. And, it just kind of looks nice, I guess. So that's how I came to be Erin J Doyle on the page. Not that I've actually published anything under that name yet, but, my YouTube channel, my website's under that name now, so it's here to stay. Obviously, my life would be considerably easier if I had just started off as Erin J Doyle, or I had never stopped being Erin Doyle at all. But when I made that decision to go from Erin Doyle to EJ Doyle, there were a lot of things that made me think it was a good idea, all to do with marketing and the fact that I was writing a vampire novel. All seemed very sensible, and I probably could have continued publishing under Erin J Doyle if I had just put aside the desire to obscure my gender. But the ultimate thing to me was I just didn't like being that name on the page as much as I thought I would. And maybe that's just something that I couldn't know until I had done it and seen those initials instead of a name in a contents page. So that's everything. The how and the why I've gone from Erin Doyle to EJ Doyle to Erin J Doyle. Maybe this was interesting. Maybe some people who see this video are still deciding what name to publish under and have in some way found it useful just to kind of get an additional perspective on what it's like to publish under anything but the name that you would use to introduce yourself to people or that your family know you as. Maybe it was just something to fill the time. I don't know. But at any rate, I've run out of stuff to say, so that'll be the end of this video. If you've enjoyed it, give it a like. If you're new here, perhaps consider hitting subscribe and ringing that notification bell so you can stay up to date with my various goings on. And I'll see you next time. Bye! This isn't the right notebook.